Good afternoon. My name is Zsolt Demetrovics, and I'm going to chair this major session co-organized by the International Society for the Study of Behavioral Addictions. And I would like to welcome all of you and also our three speakers. We agreed that they would sit in the first line here during their talks, and then for the discussion they will move on the stage for the table. So thanks very much for joining us this afternoon, and we hope that it's going to be an exciting and important session and discussion today. When we experience that there are more and more behavioral addiction related papers submitted to this conference, and also generally in the literature we come across more and more studies, which is very good, and we have been experienced a very serious development in the field. However, when we were thinking about what to focus on under the umbrella of this conference, we thought that maybe issues related to interventions, either treatment or prevention, maybe especially policies and regulations, then there are not that much literature, not that much results are available. We are still at the beginning of this journey, so we thought to put this into focus. And so the three presentations today will focus on these topics, just to look a little bit about the treatment issues, policy issues, prevention issues related to behavioral addictions. And I won't talk more, so I pass on the floor to the speakers. We will have three excellent speakers, and for 20 minutes each talk, and we decided not to have questions after each talk, but have a general discussion at the end of the sessions after the three talks. And the first presentation will come from Dr. Orsolya Király, who is working at the Eötvös Loránd University in Budapest, Hungary, and who will talk about policy approaches in behavioral addictions or past experiences, but also about possible future directions. So, Orsolya, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me? And sorry, do I have something or? Oh, okay. And no, because it doesn't even. Sorry. Someone is doing it for me. Sorry. No, it was my presentation. I just couldn't. Now I can. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay. So, thank you very much. I will start quickly because time passes. So I'm Orsolya Király. I'm from at Eötvös Loránd University, Budapest, Hungary, and my main research interest is the psychology of video games and gaming disorder in particular. And today I will talk about policy approaches in behavioral addictions with also a great emphasis on video games. So just to quickly introduce the topic, we have a rapid technological advancement since like the past 3 decades, and which really changed our lives in all areas. And we have rapidly found ourselves dependent on our digital devices, which led to an increased screen time. And while majority of people can use these devices in a healthy manner, there is a minority who experiences addiction-like symptoms, and have negative consequences and functional impairment in the case of video gaming, social media use, online gambling, and so on. This was also acknowledged by the American Psychiatric Association and the World Health Organization when they established new diagnostic categories. Namely, right now, gambling disorder and gaming disorder are included in the ICD-11, and the gambling disorder was included in the DSM-5, and internet gaming disorder in the appendix, like a condition warranting further research. So the problematic use of internet, video games, social media, and smartphones have been considered a growing public health issue around the world, and raised the possibility or the need for governmental regulation. China was perhaps the first to identify this problem already around 2005, and viewed this as a national public health crisis and addressed this through strict policy regulations. They established hundreds of boot camps to treat adolescents, and they had some policy regulations. So today's presentation is to provide an overview of such regulations and policy approaches, mainly regarding video games, social media, and smartphone use at schools. But to start with, just very, very quickly about gambling, which is traditionally a highly regulated industry. For example, gambling is not available for minors in majority of the countries across the world. There are duty of care requirements in most of the countries with varying degrees of applicability and industry compliance, but there are. And such responsible or safer gambling practices include self-exclusion services, time limit and deposit limit settings, credit card restrictions, etc. However, there is an inherent conflict of interest because so to be profitable, gambling relies on individuals losing money. And since the majority of gamblers spend small amounts of money, the profits are driven by a minority group of high spending gamblers who incur high losses. So given that that problem gamblers usually belong to this high spending gambler group, the duty of care system should target this profit-bringing group, causing an inherent conflict of interest for the industry. But going on, so moving on to the video game field, which is not regulated in a way as the gambling field. Yes, but first, before going into details, I would like kind of to promote a work done by the Council of Europe's Pompidou Group. It's just recently released a policy paper on strategies and regulatory options aimed at reducing risks and harms related to online gaming and online gambling, its aim is to help member states if they want to do to establish such policy regulations. They can use this report and this policy paper to guide them in establishing these regulations. And so now, to go more into details with video games, because there is this global interest in gaming disorder, the need for regulation has arisen worldwide. And but still, policy measures were only implemented in a few countries, and also like very small parts. These regulations are existent predominantly in Asian countries. And if we want to group them, we can say that there are policy measures limiting time spent playing online games. There are some measures aiming to reduce risk and harm. There are measures taken to provide health services for gamers. And there are some specific policy measures limiting the availability of predatory monetization techniques such as loot boxes. And I will go into more details about all of these. So how they try to limit time spent playing video games. in around 2010, it was China and South Korea and some other Asian countries which introduced governmental regulations limiting time spent playing games for minors and regarding online games, usually. They aim to reduce the number of problematic or addicted gamers with these regulations. Such a regulation was, for example, the shutdown system, where governments obliged game service providers to block access to their online games for teenagers between specific times of the day, usually between midnight and early morning. Then the selective shutdown policy was about that minors or their parents or caregivers could make requests to game service providers to prevent access to gaming for preset hours of their choice. This is pretty similar to the self-exclusion option in gambling. Then the fatigue system, or it was also called anti-online game addiction system, where online game providers were obliged to monitor the users' playtime and discourage underage users from playing for prolonged periods by cutting down their in-game rewards. So if gamers were playing more than for 3 hours, then they didn't get, so they got less and less experience points, for example, for their playing. And the last regulation was limiting access to internet cafes. This is again for Asian countries where there is a big culture of going to internet cafes, especially by minors and young people. So they were prohibited late night access from these internet cafes. And in the case of non-compliance, it was not the adolescents, but the internet service providers who were financially penalized. And just very recently, China had two laws. The first one in 2019, when they prohibited children under 18 from playing online games for more than 1.5 hours a day or 3 hours on public holidays. And then they even made this regulation stricter in 2021 when they prohibited children from playing online games at all, except between 8 and 9 on Friday. 8 and 9 on Fridays, Saturdays, Sundays, and public holidays. So basically, they could, at this moment, they can play for a maximum of 3 hours a week. When this regulation came out, it caused a kind of an interesting debate between Western and Asian researchers. I won't go into details, but there are a lot of articles on this, and they are pretty interesting. But to see, even more interesting, whether these regulations are effective or not. Unfortunately, we don't really know at this point. There are very few studies testing policy impact and effectiveness, and the findings are controversial, with majority of the studies reporting ineffectiveness and some reporting effectiveness. With most of these studies are governmental reports, so we don't really know whether what's the truth. And interestingly, in 2021, South Korea abolished their shutdown policy, which was introduced a decade earlier, saying that it was out of date, and now they also want to respect their young people's rights, and they want to allow families to enforce limitations themselves, so they abolished this law. Most probably, they also didn't find it very effective after all. Measures aiming to reduce risk and harm. Here, we could classify here the warning messages. So, for example, in-game warning messages related to the risks of excessive game playing, which is arguably analogous with the health warning messages that appear on tobacco products. And this look like, for example, like this one from World of Warcraft game, advising to take all things in moderation, even the game moreover, there could be, so these are not policy regulations, but industry self-regulation measures, could be personalized warning messages when the game itself tracks the behavior of the player, and after some time it could tell the gamer that they were spending that much time and they should take a break. We don't really have data on this, on the effectiveness, but from related fields, there is an assumption that it would have some effect, some positive effect. It could also, so it was also argued that games could be designed to be less addictive. If game developers or publishers would alter some of the game design elements in a way that games become less addictive or at least less exploitative of players' time investment. And this was based on also some scientific research which suggests that specific structural characteristics, features contribute directly to or can contribute directly to the development of gaming disorder. So this could be, on one hand, a legal regulation imposed by governments, but it's highly challenging to do it well. I will give you the example of loot boxes a bit later, so why it's challenging. Or it could be a self-regulatory measure, but again, then in that case, again, we have a conflict of interest from the industry. However, and relatedly, there are some very nice research already on how to measure the addictive potential of video games, which would be actually very useful on one hand for parents and gamers to make informed decisions when they choose the games. It could be also informative for game developers if they wanted to reduce the addictive potential of their games. So if they wished that. And so just very quickly, these two measurement instruments, they were quite recently published, both in this year. The SHARP-G scale, which was published in the Journal of Behavioral Addictions, and it consists of so it measures 5 overarching categories of game design elements or structural characteristics that could contribute to the development of gaming disorder. These are social, gambling-like features, personal investment, accessibility, and world design. And yeah, so I unfortunately don't have time to go into more details, but it's a really promising and interesting measure. And the other one was published by Florian Regbane and based on a long work he had done in the past 15 years. And what is interesting about it's a much more, I would say it's a even more complex and complicated measure. And besides giving information on the addictive potential of games, it also proposes some age recommendations based on these structural features. Measures taken to provide help services for gamers, that's the third block. So because there are some people who have gaming disorder on a clinical level, they created the demand for some kind of proactive intervention, and these prevention and treatment programs right now can be either part of the national policy in specific countries, and again predominantly in Asian countries, where, for example, in China and South Korea, there are hundreds of state-owned rehabilitation centers, while in the United States and Western Europe, there are some state-owned rehabilitation centers as well, but there are non-governmental organizations and private businesses who are offering such services. This could also be part of a corporate social responsibility measure for gaming companies, so they could offer prevention programs, or they could spot those people who are who have problems, and they could direct them to such treatment facilities. For example, they could even finance their treatment if we could make them do that. And the last block, so policy measures limiting the availability of predatory monetization techniques. Predatory monetization techniques are purchasing systems that disguise or withhold the long-term cost of the activity until the players are financially and psychologically committed. And these schemes contribute to the increasing similarity of video games and gambling. The so-called whales are the small number of high-level spenders in mostly in free-to-play video games. So in free-to-play video games, people can spend money, and a small part of people are spending a lot of money. They are called the whales. According to research, these whales seem to be rather problem gamblers than wealthy gamers, which suggests that the game developers are kind of intentionally exploiting vulnerable people, individuals. A proposed classification of such predatory monetization techniques was done by Petrovskaya and Zendel. It has like 8 overarching categories and has specific techniques like pay or wait, in-game currency disguising actual price, or limited time offers. In China, they are again ahead of others, proposing new regulations to tackle the overspending of gamers to curb unhealthy spending habits. And this time, these rules, so they propose some rules, they are not final at this point, but it sparked a panic among investors because this was the first time when they targeted adult gamers too, not just minors. And so it really led to a panic among investors. And after this panic, so they even announced that these regulations are labeled negotiable and will undergo further deliberations. And at this point, we don't even know what will follow after this. One major issue or field within the predatory monetization techniques are loot boxes. Loot boxes are virtual items, often boxes in video games, which can be opened by players to receive randomized rewards, and these boxes can usually be purchased by real money. So it really resembles gambling, and it's argued by a lot of researchers that it is gambling, and because of this, it shouldn't be allowed for minors. However, of course, the industry doesn't agree, and they say that no, for some reasons, it shouldn't be considered gambling, and there is kind of a battle over it. But there are some regulations around the world which vary across countries. There are 2 major directions of these regulations. The banning loot boxes, which is at the moment was done by Belgium, and on the other hand, China requires disclosure of the probabilities of obtaining random rewards, including loot boxes. So these are the 2 main directions. And there is some research on the effectiveness, which says that on one hand, loot box ban in Belgium, unfortunately, so it was not effectively enforced, even if they have the law. 80%, more than 80% of the games still include loot boxes. And regarding the other direction, loot box probability disclosure in China, and in the UK, so research shows that their companies may adhere to this law, but what they do, even if they have disclosures, only a very small proportion of these disclosures are prominent, so are useful actually. In the other cases, they do it in a very deceptive way, so they can adhere to the law, but it's not useful at all for the customers after all. Just very, very briefly about social media regulation. This is a very broad topic. I just want to touch upon those issues which are behavioral, so related to the behavioral addiction field. The Kids Online Safety Act is a proposed legislation in the US which aims to establish guidelines to protect minors from harmful materials on social media platforms through a duty of care system, and it also requires platforms to disable the addicting design features to minors. This act was the Senate passed this bill this summer, but because there is an ongoing pushback from the tech industry and the freedom of speech organizations, it's still a question what future will the legislation face in the House, so it's still a question. Okay. There is a similar bill drafted right now in the UK as well, and as I talked with some colleagues, it seems that other countries have discussions on these issues as well. Relatedly, there is an industry self-regulation measure as well. Instagram just announced that they will create the teen account settings, and they are actually launching it right now. This means that the company will automatically place teens into teen accounts, which means that those under 16 will have some special settings, which could be changed only by their parents. And these include some settings which are interested for the behavioral addictions field. They will get time limit reminders, so notifications telling them to leave the app after an hour of use every day, and the sleep mode enabled, which means that the sleep mode will be turned on between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. in the morning, and this will mute notifications overnight and send automatic replies to direct messages. Okay, and just very briefly, one last topic, the smartphone bans in schools. Several countries across the globe are taking measures to ban smartphones from schools because the reason for this is that the use of smartphones distract students from learning, increase cyberbullying, and may lead to poor mental health outcomes, including the risk of addiction. And in reality, ban is a simplistic term. It's usually some partial restriction when students are required to hand in their smartphones at arrival, or they should keep them in bags, so on. But it's quite prevalent in several countries that they take such measures. And we have already some studies on policy effectiveness. These studies target academic performance, mental health and social well-being, and cyberbullying as outcomes. And I found 2 reviews on the topic, which says that there is an absence of randomized control trials. So even if there are some studies, they are not very high quality and just a few to date. And so according to the results, there are mixed results regarding academic performance with small effect sizes, and there are more consistent results with small effect sizes regarding social well-being and cyberbullying in those cases where they don't use their mobile phones in school. Okay, and just to quickly wrap this up, so majority of policy regulations in gambling, gaming, social media, smartphone use target minors because they are considered the most vulnerable population group. There is a strong opposition from the industry in all fields because of this inherent conflict of interest I was talking about. And what's interesting, even the goal of self-regulation measures is often to avoid stricter legal regulations and to maintain control over what and how, so whether and how much the product is regulated. So it's kind of pretending things. Policy effectiveness is really not yet clear. There is a lot, so more research is needed, and there is a great need for public access to industry data, which means that, that right now industry has an information advantage, which is really not okay. We should stick to safety by design, which says that the responsibility should rest with the companies to do less harm and not with the consumers to protect themselves. So that's very important. And lastly, so it's a global problem. It should be harmonized. Regulation should be harmonized across countries, while also taking into consideration the cultural or local specificities. And yes, so I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much for this presentation, and as we agreed, so we move on to the next talk, and then we will have a discussion at the end, and that's towards the questions related to recovery, and the presentation will be delivered by Belle Gavriel-Fried from Tel Aviv University and also visiting professors at King's College London. So Belle, the floor is yours.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm very excited to be here, and thank you for the invitation to stand on this floor. So I'm going to shed light on the concept of recovery and its manifestation in the behavioral addictions. So my presentation will be divided into 3 parts. I will begin with an overview of the concept of recovery in addiction field. Then I will talk about current insight into recovery in the behavioral addictions, and I will finish with conclusions and recommendations. So, the basic and simple definition of recovery relates to change and transition, usually from illness to health. However, and there is however, almost every scoping or systematic review on recovery in the addiction field, regardless the specific addiction, begins with a similar statement that there is no consensus among treatment providers and policymakers on how recovery should be defined and measured. This lack of consensus leads to inconsistency in both defining and assessing this concept. So instead of presenting just definitions of recovery, I would like to address the inconsistency by organizing it into 3 main paradigms or perspectives, enable us to uncover the underlying meanings and objectives behind various recovery definitions, whether they pertain to substance addictions or behavioral addictions. So the 3 approaches are the deficit-based approach, the strength-based approach, and the harm reduction. So the traditional approach is a deficit-based one, which is shaped by principles of 12 steps mutual aid programs and the medical model that view addiction as a chronic disease. From this perspective, recovery is defined and evaluated in terms of abstinence, sobriety, and symptom reduction. However, and again, there is however, definitions of recovery that focus just on abstinence or symptom reduction are overly narrow and fail to reflect and capture the broader and holistic nature of recovery. So, on the other side of the continuum is the strength-based approach, first introduced in the mid-1990s and presented a paradigmatic shift. Rooted in mental health consumer movements, it emphasizes personal growth rather than reduction of pathology and correspondences with the principles of positive psychology. From this perspective, recovery is understood as a holistic and multidimensional process of change. While acknowledging the existence of problem behaviors, it involves self-directed means and manifest and measured by improvement in a range of biopsychosocial aspects of life, such as well-being, quality of life, and integration in the society. So, in between, there is the harm reduction approach. I place this approach in between because it corresponds with the idea of deficit by reduction of harms, but it also corresponds to one's capacity for self-determinations in terms of if, when, and how he or she uses drugs, and their ability to evaluate the consequences that could follow. It allows the individuals to modulate and negotiate the drug use without imminent pressures for abstinence, and allowing therapists to meet clients where they are at. So, overall, current approaches of recovery aim to be more inclusive by emphasizing the element of individuals' self-determinations, and there is a shared understanding among experts that recovery is an ongoing process rather than an outcome that is static once achieved. It is holistic and multidimensional, encompassing the body, mind, and spirit, and also that it is recognized that there are many pathways to recovery. Treatment is one option, but not the only one, as many individuals recover naturally without formal intervention. So now what I'm going to present is based, I like to focus on recovery in the field of behavioral addictions, and what I'm going to present is based on 4 scoping reviews covering gaming disorder, compulsive sexual behavior disorder, and 2 scoping reviews about gambling disorder, with 1 review specifically focused on gambling disorder among veterans. Through these scoping reviews, I will try to answer on the following questions. So, I would like to answer on the question, how central is the concept of recovery in empirical studies on gambling disorder, gaming disorder, and compulsive sexual behavioral disorder? Do researchers explicitly use the term recovery when they frame studies' aims and hypotheses? Do they clearly define the term recovery? What is the prominent recovery approach in these studies? And what role does abstinence play in the context of recovery from behavioral addictions? So, as for the first questions, how central is the concept of recovery in the field of behavioral addictions? There are 2 key answers to this question. First, it depends. It depends specifically on which behavioral addiction we are discussing. Second, we could certainly do more to integrate the concept of recovery across the field of behavioral addictions. So, how central is the concept? Let's see. And here I summarize in this table the findings from the 4 scoping reviews and compare between them. So let's review the findings presented in this table. So, among thousands of empirical studies published over the years, and by the way, these reviews were conducted with no restriction of publications dates, we identified only 47 empirical studies related to recovery in gaming disorder and 37 in compulsive sexual behavioral disorder. While the number of the studies on gambling disorder is slightly more encouraging, probably because this is more established behavioral addiction, these figures are still relatively low. The numbers decrease further when considering whether researchers explicitly mentioned the term recovery, define it, or included it in their study aims or hypotheses. And I must say that these findings are quite surprising. Think about it, that in some cases, researchers conduct studies that assesses individuals actively seeking treatment, those who like to recover. Yet, the concept of recovery is absent from the studies themselves. I would like to define this phenomena as recovery blindness. So to address the question, which recovery paradigm is the most dominant, we examined the words and terms used by researchers to describe recovery and the way they measured it. So the dominant approach to measuring recovery is the deficit-based approach. Researchers, no matter in which field of behavioral addictions, primarily assess treatment outcomes or changes in patients by focusing on symptom reductions and pathology rather than on improvements in well-being. We could see also fewer studies use the terms reduction and improvement together when addressing changes in psychiatric symptoms and biopsychosocial factors, which suggests that that researchers used an integrative approaches that combine between multiple recovery approaches. But overall, the deficit-based approach that explored symptom reductions remains the dominant method for measuring recovery. However, the picture changes when we examine the relevance of the role of abstinence in these studies. So, there are notable differences between gambling disorder, gaming disorder, and compulsive sexual behavioral disorder in relation to abstinence. In the case of gambling disorder, studies define recovery in terms of abstinence or use it as a benchmark to measure the effectiveness of interventions. Abstinence is a common recovery goal. When relapse is included as an outcome, it often defined as an opposite of abstinence. We can see also, but not many, researchers that use the concept of controlled gambling, which offers a more flexible approach than abstinence, and it mentions only in a few studies. These studies suggest that both abstinence and controlled gambling can be effective treatment goals, with controlled gambling presented as a potential alternative to abstinence. As for gaming and compulsive sexual behavioral disorder, abstinence is mentioned in only a few studies, and it is clear that the goal of recovery is not complete abstinence, but rather controlled use or behavior. And if researchers mention abstinence, is for a limited amount of time. For example, Kings et al. And colleagues conducted a pilot study testing the efficacy of a voluntary 84 hours abstinence protocol to modify problematic internet gambling cognitions and behaviors. They recommended brief abstinence as a simple, practical, and cost-effective treatment technique for altering unhelpful gaming cognitions and reducing internet gaming problem. So in the case of gaming and compulsive sexual behavioral disorder, we see a complex trend where studies measure treatment outcomes by symptom reduction, yet abstinence is not a recovery aim. More findings from these scoping reviews, we can also learn from these scoping reviews that a significant portion of the studies focus on treatment evaluation and effectiveness. And now, again, it is important to highlight that treatment is just one path to recovery, and a method to achieve it. It is not recovery itself. By concentrating primarily on conducting studies on treatment, we limit our understanding and miss the opportunity to explore other recovery pathways. It is also important to mention that the most studies on recovery are quantitative and focus primarily on male samples. Those that include both genders tend to relate sex rather than gender, treating gender as a demographic variable and disregarding the social and cultural constructs of gender and their influence on behavioral addictions. Finally, as for the countries where these studies were conducted, we can see that in the gaming field, most studies on recovery conducted in Asian countries, and we can see that most studies conducted on recovery from gambling disorder in military veterans were conducted in the US. So now I would like to summarize what I said and to say several things. Compare the numerous studies published on behavioral addictions, the field of recovery remains largely unexplored. There are relatively few studies that specifically focus on recovery from behavioral addictions. Among the behavioral addiction studies that I presented, the concept of recovery is most prominently discussed in gambling disorder compared to compulsive sexual behavioral disorder and gaming disorder. Researchers who conduct studies on recovery do not explicitly use this word or define it. The dominance of the deficit-based approach in terms of measuring reduction rather than measuring strength in the field of behavioral addictions suggests that history repeats itself. A similar process or pattern occurred in the field of substance use addictions, where the deficit-based approach prevailed for decades before the paradigmatic shift towards strength-based approaches emerged. It appears that behavioral addictions are undergoing a similar trajectory. This pattern can be explained by the fact that as a relatively new field, the initial focus is on understanding the disorder itself, its symptoms, and the risk factors that contribute to it, under the assumption that in identifying the root of the problem will provide the key to recovery. As for control behavior versus abstinence, I think that the difference we saw between gambling disorder and gaming and compulsive sexual behavioral disorder is because that gambling disorder is the first behavioral addiction, and as such, it adapted its terminology and treatment approaches from substance use addictions. Finally, the focus on control behavior rather than static abstinence, as we see in gaming and compulsive sexual behavioral disorder, present a challenge for both individuals in recovery and treatment providers, underscoring the need for a real paradigmatic shift. So, recommendation and future directions. So, holding all these in our mind, we should adapt recovery perspective and wear recovery glasses. First, by conducting more studies on recovery itself. We also should understand that there are a variety of recovery definitions, and this is fine, as there are many pathways to recovery, and each individual should tailor his or her own recovery suit. But we should clarify our recovery paradigm. It is important to be aware of our recovery agenda and recognize how it shapes our research. I think we also should promote a paradigmatic shift. While abstinence is not a possible recommendation for many behavioral addictions, alternative ways should be explored and developed. And here I would like to suggest a definition for recovery adapted from mental health disorders. It defines recovery as a process of change that includes personal growth and improvement in multiple life domains, despite the presence of ongoing mental illness. I think that this definition is realistic and balanced, offering a holistic view of recovery that acknowledges not only resources and strength, but also the challenges and barriers individuals face. I think we should address gender gap in recovery research. There is a significant gap in research addressing gender issues in recovery, particularly regarding the unique experience and challenges faced by women. I think we should embrace or integrate more qualitative research methods. Most studies in these scoping reviews are quantitative. Qualitative research grounded in the lived experiences of individuals in recovery. It is crucial to do much more studies using these qualitative methods. Such studies usually consider the context in which recovery takes place and how socio-cultural and political aspects affect recovery experience. It is also important to explore the recovery experience of people in war zones and how the collective trauma they experience shape the unique recovery challenges of these individuals. And finally, I suggest to explore alternative recovery pathways. Don't overlook those who recover naturally without formal interventions. It is important to explore and understand these alternative recovery processes. So, holding all these in our mind, I wish to all of us good luck with the new path to recovery. Thank you.
Thank you, Belle. And our third presentation will be about treatment issues from Klaus Wölfling professor from the University of Mainz and also future director of addiction clinic in Hamburg. So thank you very much for accepting our invitation, and the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for the invitation to speak about psychotherapy of internet addiction and internet gaming disorder especially. And I have here I want to give you a brief overview about scientific results in psychotherapy research, as well as a slightly view on clinical practice. So I want to combine it in my lecture. So, treatment of behavioral addictions, where are we now? It's a big question to answer, and I try to answer it from the scientific perspective as well as from the clinician view. But the first question is, it is justified to acknowledge internet addiction as a mental disorder, as a question. And you can see here on the left side how AI, artificial intelligence, is creating video game addiction, and I think it's a little bit a dark pattern for the patients, as you can see it here in this image. But I guess that you all have the idea, or you think about it, that we can talk about a mental illness in behavioral addiction, especially in internet usage disorder or internet addiction. So at the moment, we have the process of publication of the ICD-11 in different countries is ongoing, and we have gaming and gambling addiction as classified diagnosis in the chapter of disorders due to substance use and addictive behaviors. I guess you know it all. So we can diagnose gambling disorder and gaming disorder as predominantly online or predominantly offline usage behavior. And as we heard before from you, Belle, it is mainly abstinence orientated psychotherapy in gambling addiction, and it is discussed in gaming disorder. But what is about the other specific disorders due to addictive behaviors, which we have as a residual category? But there is not a final decision yet which subtypes will be classified in the residual category. So there's a tendency for online sex addiction or online pornography use and social network disorders, but because there are many studies of this problematic usage behavior. On the other hand, you can diagnose online sex addiction also as CSBD, compulsive sexual behavior disorder, in the OCD spectrum disorder, in the ICD-11. So this raises the question, which other, besides gaming and gambling disorder, which other internet usage disorders have addictive potential and have to be treated in outpatient or inpatient clinics. So this mirrors a little bit the treatment seekers, or this question is mirrored by the treatment seekers of our outpatient clinic in the University of Mainz, and we have here a great proportion of online gaming addiction on the treatment seekers as well, gambling addiction, and you can see it on this left diagram that internet poker as well as internet sports betting has a proportion in this part, online gambling addiction. On the other hand, we have internet addiction, about 180 persons or patients in the year 2022, and we have here a rising proportion of online sex addiction, and we have also social network addiction as well as streaming and download, which is not so really good defined or best defined at the moment from a clinical perspective or from a diagnosis. But what we know about the efficacy of the treatment of internet-related disorders, and here I focus mainly on internet gaming disorder because all quantitative research goes mainly on internet gaming disorder, and so that was too fast. And to give you an expression of the so-called opponent from a psychotherapeutic subjective view, you can see here a large or a huge audience, larger than here, which gives the gamers some advantage in their gaming behavior. So we have here the idea of financial advantage. We have here self-efficacy and the fame to win a game, and you can imagine how strong the self-efficacy is arising when you sit there and you are gaming on the stage. But looking at the literature, we have to clarify what is the ongoing discussion, whether specific forms of therapy are needed due to the severity of subforms of internet-related disorders. So we can use one of the forms, that's internet gaming disorder, at the moment as a model for the other ones, for the other internet-related addictive behaviors. And at a review of Professor Dong and Mark Potenza, we can see that there are 16 studies included in a review concerning the last 10 years of research of treatments of internet gaming disorder. So we can take this as a model for psychotherapy of the scientific evaluation of psychotherapeutic approaches. And a lot of studies were excluded to this review. So you can see only 16 studies were included, and the interventions were mainly based on CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. This is the most studied therapy approach and the most effective psychotherapy approach today. Medications has to be used with caution. Bupropion is one of the pharmacos that are analyzed in medication therapy, as well as some other SSRIs. NIBS treatment, the non-invasive brain stimulation, requires further research, but there are ongoing research on additional additional treatment approaches which are combining with psychotherapy, maybe, for instance, NIBS. Other treatment approaches like multidimensional family therapy or psychoeducative programs are mainly conducted in adolescents or in young adults. So the recent status of evaluated treatment approaches are very small. Let's take a closer look on CBT, because CBT is a mainly analyzed and evaluated form of psychotherapy at the moment. And I think we have to look at the quantitative research when we do some practice work in our clinics. The superiority of CBT-based treatment approaches were driven out by Dong and colleagues, and we have here 6 randomized controlled studies in comparison. So let's take a look of one study a little bit closer. That's the study in my working group were performed in 2019, and I will show you some results of the study. The question was, is this CBT program effective, which we developed in our psychosomatic clinic? And we wanted to prove the short-term treatment of internet and computer game addiction. And you see here there is both combined internet gaming disorder as well as internet addiction is combined in this therapeutic approach. We wanted to analyze the efficacy of the CBT short-term treatment and as well as investigate the stability of the treatment outcome, but for a very short-term effect, about 6 months, the follow-up. As well, we wanted to know how is the influence of psychiatric symptoms like depression and social anxiety. It was a multi-center design in 4 centers in Germany and Austria, and it was estimated to analyze 192 patients. It was based on a published program, and this is one point in many of the studies you can't find the published treatment programs. So you have only the RCTs, and oftenly you have Chinese programs which are not translated into English or in other languages. We have here approved a German version of the short-term treatment program, and it is also internationally published in the Oxford Handbook of Digital Technologies and Mental Health, edited by Mark Potenza and the colleagues Faust. Okay, the ITT population, the intent to treat population, was not only gaming disorder, as you can see here, was also online sex addiction included, as well as offline gaming disorder, and other forms are equally distributed to the domains of social network addiction and buying addiction. So internet addiction as an umbrella term was here included in the study. The screen times ranges in the experimental group between 6.5 and 8.5 hours in the mean in both groups. So let me say something about the results. You can see here that the measured of the IEKS, it is a screening instrument for internet addiction, and we have a rising non-pathological level, and the significant influence of the treatment of IEKS is measured in this screening instrument, but also as a blinded version of psychotherapists. The patients of the therapy group have 10 times increased chance to change their symptom score to non-pathologic after the treatment compared to the patient of the weightless control, and this is a relatively large effect size. So it was a study which has the effect on abstinence of the treated patients in the experimental group compared to the weightless control. Going beyond, we had the chance to do some modules of this psychotherapy and a counseling program in the OMPRES study. There we have an online counseling program tested in 180 persons older than 16 years who suffered from IUD symptoms and showed pathological internet usage behavior. It was a randomized group allocation to webcam-based online counseling program and the weightless control again. And here we can see sometimes it's a little bit counterintuitive that we can also doing counseling in an online setting. So we try to access patients in the consumption room, a so-called consumption room internet. The manualized webcam-based online program was able to reduce the symptoms of internet use disorders and increase the motivation to change problematic internet behavior and self-efficacy. And the last one is a very important thing. I want to remember you about the image of the stage on where the gaming people has played. Okay. Going ahead to other research concerning internet addiction, there is a study from Zhu, a recent study from Zhu et al. It's a review with a network meta-analysis, and there were published RCTs analyzed in Chinese and English language, and all study subjects had to meet the diagnosis criteria. The network analysis was performed on this included studies, generating 78 pairwise comparison to compare the effect sizes of these different RCT studies. 13 interventions which were compared are ranked according to their efficacy. And you can see it here on this map, on this network map from Zhu and colleagues, that not only CBT, besides RTMS and drug and other treatments, as well as electroacupuncture, as well as EEG biofeedback, has ranked on the first places 1 to 5. What does this mean? Comprehensive intervention that combines drug therapy, physical therapy, and psychotherapy has better therapeutic effects than medication or psychotherapy alone, following Zhu et al. He has the idea to combining the benefits of various methods such as RTMS and CBT can yield promising results in future research on internet gaming disorder. So we try to do oftenly in our clinic or in both clinics to do a little bit translational work to put in the ongoing psychotherapy some scientific research results, and maybe we have also the chance in some research projects to analyze this additional forms of psychotherapy. As you can see it here, in our ongoing research, we are investigating the potential effect of additional cue exposure therapy. Maybe you know it from the substance use disorders. In the treatment of gaming and gambling addiction, we have the chance to analyze the effects there. It is a project which is embedded in the exit research group for 2974, which is ongoing in Germany, and we are here, or I have here the chance to analyze the assessment of in-game craving and craving inherent factors in gaming and online gambling in semi-natural settings and biofeedback-guided cue exposure training. So as you see, we try to do additional approaches besides cognitive behavioral therapy, which is our key feature in the clinic, and to have the best treatment approaches for our patients. On the picture here on the right side, on the bottom, you can see a slot machine where a smartphone is presented the skin conductance response in the Q exposure therapy, and we have the chance to reflect the tension and the arousal, the emotional arousal of the patient in such a Q exposure session in the third part of the therapy, not in the first or second part, in the third part. I think that's a good additional approach to use this. Now I have a video for you, and it's an example of Q exposure therapy and online gambling addiction, what we use usually in our clinic to treat in this Q exposure session patients with gambling disorder. And here is a clear focus of abstinence from gambling issues. So the video presents you insights into the Q exposure therapy, and as you can see on this laptop, there is a poker session going on, and left to me there sits a patient which has a history of poker gambling, and he is very calm in the first hour, and now you can see a rising.
All of it! Wow! Oh my!
Holy cow.
Just jams on the river after check raising turn.
Man. Yeah, everyone out of their seats.
Yeah, everyone out of this.
Person calls! Person wins! A pot of more than $830,000!
Und da waren wir halt bei 7 jetzt schon. Ne? Das war ein hoher Ausschlag.
Okay, I think you can see very impressively how the emotional impression is reflected by the skin conductance response, and the patient before has a very calm and not many facial expressions because he's a poker gambler, and it was very surprisingly for him that he has such big impact on his emotional arousing at this scene. So let me come to some conclusions and applications for future research. CBT is the most widely studied therapy thus far, and future studies should consider IGD-specific CBT treatment strategies, but maybe also for other usage forms like online sex addiction, social network disorder. Medication-based treatment should be implemented with caution. Comprehensive interventions that combine different approaches and psychotherapy have in certain circumstances better therapeutic effects than medication or psychotherapy alone. NIBS is promising and should be explored further, and studies should consider also sex difference in the treatment of internet gaming disorders. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Klaus. And then I would also invite the other two speakers to the stage. And the floor is open for any questions or comments. I think that we have received a lot of information on policy, regulation, treatment, recovery. So, yeah, or I don't know if the colleagues can help with the microphone. There would be. Do we have microphones around, or there?
I would like to make a question or a comment to Belle, if I'm allowed to. So this was a very interesting presentation. I think that the approach of recovery and natural recovery is under research in the field. And what came to my mind is that there is a difference between substance use interventions or substance use recovery processes and those that we have in the behavior addiction field. In general, if we look at the work that is done in the substance abuse field, I think the mean age of people under research was something like 50 or 52 or something like in the Middle Ages. And if we look at most of the studies in the gaming disorder or behavior addictions field, they are much younger, the populations. So, and in some of them. And in the younger populations, we may have some unstable processes of becoming the disorder. So people go into symptomatology and go back again, so it might be unstable. And these are quite different processes compared to those who are in the age of 50, who developed in the early years their dependence, had a career in parentheses of about 50 years or 40 years or 30 years, and then were able to remit with or without treatment. Yeah, that's my comment. You might wish to answer.
I think that one of the, if we are related, where? Push the button. Okay, yeah, thank you. I think it is an interesting comment, and I think if we relate to the age, and as you said, that more younger people are experiencing gaming disorder, or I don't know, as for compulsive sexual behavioral disorder, but I think that one of the most, the statement that I remember as a therapist when I used to treat younger people is that they have not reached to the peak of their addiction career. And I think, I love your comment, and I think we should take it into consideration in our global paradigmatic shift while thinking about treatment and more new strategies to treat behavioral addictions. So thank you for this comment.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gil. That was very interesting concerning recovery. And I have one comment, maybe the question. There is one disorder, which is eating disorder. And there are some countries where this is also treated within addiction. Probably in the past, now in France. And again, there it might be the recovery, which is very difficult to be abstinence-oriented. So maybe your model is okay, isn't it?
Eating disorder is not my field, but of course, I think there are much in common between this disorder, and there are similar patterns between eating disorder and addictions. I think in both you lose control. In eating disorder, anorexia, for example, it starts because you like to control your body, and then you lose, paradoxically, you lose control. I don't know about it as I think, I don't think it's an addiction like eating disorder. So it's hard for me to answer, but we should think about it. Maybe one of you have a thought.
Okay, eating disorder is always an example for the reduction or the harm reduction. In other different internet usage behaviors, and also in online sex addiction. But we can, from my perspective, from the clinical view, I can say that we have very defined learned mechanisms which provoke relapse, and for these usage behaviors we have to, or maybe we have the best effects when patients do not come in reusage of this behavior. So I think eating, we have to do all. Sex, we want and have to do all too. And but using pornography for sexual in sexual terms is not it's not the main part of a human. So.
Yeah.
Hello. So there are many connection points between gaming and gambling, with a lot of features and graphics being brought from gaming to gambling, and the other way around. I'm thinking of crash games, for instance, where it feels like you're playing a video game, but you're actually gambling. So my question would be, how far would you think this overlaps goes in terms of the addiction processes? Is a player who has a gaming disorder more likely to have a gambling disorder, for instance?
You're the expert.
Thank you for the question. So, as far as I know, research shows so there is comorbidity also. So there are people who have both, and it's also that because this all comes from the part of the industry. Of course, they don't make these distinctions. They just want to see how they can increase their profits, and they really intend to put as much gambling elements in video games or as much video game elements in gambling. They really just care to increase their profits, and because of this, we can see just this increasing convergence between the two. And I think that this really won't stop. It will be just getting worse and worse and worse. And now, so research tries to differentiate between gaming disorder and gambling disorder, and perhaps we can, but I think after all, so these people are just like falling in the trap of corporate strategy, and they are. Yeah, so and it's so you can tell more about treatment, like how you treat these people who have, let's say, both conditions. But I think that it happens quite often, and it will happen even more often in the future as they converge more and more.
Some qualitative research from our Polish colleagues show that the border between gambling and gaming is more and more blurred, yeah, and it's also not so easy to differentiate between the gaming behavior which has no financial advantage for the person who plays in comparison to compared to the person who has a financial advantage. So we have here, from the clinical perspective, the same abstinence goal-orientated psychotherapy for both forms of it. But in future times, it maybe will be very difficult to differentiate between gambling and gaming disorder, because it is blurred between this both games.
Hi, thanks for 3 wonderful, very thought-provoking presentations. I'm also going to ask Belle a question about the challenge of broadening our concept of recovery. I'm old enough that I was trained as a behaviorist, so I always, as my primary outcome in my treatment studies, want to see a reduction in the problematic behavior. So not necessarily abstinence, but they should be gambling less as the primary outcome. And then, as a secondary outcome, I have that deficit kind of focused reduction in symptoms of, DSM, addiction kind of symptoms, and that's important. And then my third outcome is quality of life, and I want to see an improvement in quality of life. And that's also very, very clearly correlated with the first two.
Yeah.
So as the behavior reduces, the quality of life begins to increase. So does quality of life measures capture what you're proposing? Or if not, like, how do we measure this?
Quality of life?
Yeah.
I had to measure it?
No. I know how to measure quality of life with, there's different scales. I'm wondering whether quality of life measures capture this concept of recovery.
The strength-based?
The strength-based, yeah.
I also make these scenes that I talked about. Before I was aware to my recovery agenda. And as I said in my presentation, there are many paths to recovery, and we can combine between agenda. So I can, in one paper study, I can measure the deficit, how there are symptoms reductions, in addition to improvement in quality of life. And this, and you're right, there is a correlation between the two. I'm from School of Social Work, and from the beginning of my studies, I had a professor who used to tell we should learn from those who succeed. And learning from success and from people that recover, it brings us to broaden our perspective about recovery and see it more and put emphasis to emphasize the strength-based approach. I'm advocating the strength-based from one hand, but on the other, I would like us to open our horizons and maybe to invite new recovery paradigms for behavioral addictions, to make some blend between things that we still don't know what they are. So, as I said in my presentation, we should be first aware to our recovery agenda, and when we measure things, we should be aware of what we measure. Did I answer you? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And I'm afraid that we have to finish at this point in this session. But I would like to say thank you to all three speakers, and I would also like to say thank you to the audience for being with us this afternoon. And just also I would like to draw your attention to one of the plenary, or actually both, but I would emphasize now one of the plenary talks tomorrow morning is also discussing the link between substance use and behavioral addiction issues, which was touched upon in these discussions. Also will be provided by Professor Mark Potenza tomorrow morning. And again, so thanks for being with us today, and enjoy the conference further.